and kind of what we're doing. So we just want to make the official announcement. September 11th through the 13th, we're going to be, IEHA is co-hosting the FDA Retail Food Protection Seminar with our annual education conference in Rosemont at the Crown Plaza. We're really, really looking forward to this. It's a huge event. There's only one of 4 going on this year, and this is the only one in the Midwest. So we're looking forward to bringing the absolute best speakers possible. On top of that, we are also very excited to announce our keynote speaker is going to be Deborah Bloom. Deborah is the author of the book Poison Squad that came out in 2018 and is an absolute phenomenal book on the foundations of public health and food safety on the federal level. So we are very, very excited for that. So I hope everyone enjoys day 3 of the conference. I know I am definitely looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. All right, so it's a few minutes early, but I think that's okay for us to go ahead and get started while I still admit some people in. I'd like to introduce you all to Lonnie Silvis. He's going to talk to us today about food is weird. So Lonnie, I'm going to turn it directly over to you to get us started. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me, first of all? Everything working? Clap your hands if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me today. My name is Lonnie Silvis. I work at the Madison County Health Department down in Southern Illinois. I like to apologize in advance for my throat. It's been going out a little bit, but I've got a drink here just in case. So I've got a presentation about food for you today. I developed this with my colleague here, Bobby Schlemmer, who could not be present for this, but I will do her part of the presentation today. I think I know it pretty well. But yes, credit to her. We developed this about a year ago, and we've given the presentation in person a couple of times. It was meant to be sort of interactive. So we have Smello samples. This slide is from when we were passing those around for people to smell. I will do my best just to describe these samples to you all. So unless the people at Zoom have come up with some kind of technology that I'm not aware of, you won't be able to smell anything today. Apologies. Another part of the interactivity was we asked that people raise their hand on each slide if the slide of that food item is something they've encountered before in the field or elsewhere. If you could do, I think there's reactions here. You could do the clap reaction or something like that when it pops up, if it's something that you've seen. That way I can get a good idea. Back to this slide. So just a disclaimer, weirdness is subjective. So everything that we talk about today, it might be an uncommon thing or something that you haven't seen before, but it could be an everyday food item to someone else. So when you're out in the field as inspectors, don't be afraid to communicate or talk to operators about foods that you do not know what they are. You might learn something about the food item from them. They might learn something about the safety of the food item from you. So we'll start out with some things you've probably seen before, but as we go along, we should get more and more rare. First one here. Now, Bobby is definitely the sushi expert. I do enjoy it, but raw fish and shellfish. Now, raw fish and raw seafood is something that you've probably come into contact with before. Most areas will have a seafood restaurant or perhaps like a Japanese restaurant or Hawaiian restaurant, depending, that will have one of these items. Sushi, I think, is probably what we're all most familiar with. That's the rolls. Sashimi, that would be raw strips of the fish as pictured on the bottom left there. Getting more and more popular these days, poke bowls, top middle photo there. It's like a bowl with marinated, seasoned raw fish and vegetables and rice and things. I believe that is something from Hawaiian cuisine originally. Pictured on the top right, ceviche in Mexican cuisine that contains raw seafood. And of course, we have plain old, raw oysters or other types of shell stock. I'm going to sprinkle in some food safety into this, as I probably should. Things to look out for, obviously, are, as you guys know, parasite destruction. When we're dealing with fish that aren't going to be cooked, some of them are susceptible to parasites and having parasites or their eggs on them. If they are not heat treated, they could survive. And if they are not frozen to adequate temperature and time combinations, they could also survive. So look out for assurances from their supplier of parasite destruction. Shell stock tags if you've got something like oysters, and consumer advisories on menus. So let's dive in a little bit more to ceviche. This is a raw seafood dish. As pictured here, you can see shrimp, and it usually contains shrimp, fish, scallops, things like that. And it is unique in that it is cooked, put that in parentheses, by adding acid, typically lime, lemon, or orange juice, or some other sort of citrusy things, or a combination of those with perhaps vinegar. The acid that is present in these denatures protein of the seafood. It changes the appearance. So while it may look like it is cooked, it is not. It can be completely raw, no heat ever applied to it, but look like the flesh is firmed up, like from a cooking process. The acidity could kill off some of the bacteria, but we wouldn't know exactly what has been done to all the little critters on these guys just by seasoning it simply, without taking any sort of pH measurements, certainly. So it would require a consumer advisory. White tuna or escolar is something that you may run into if you have sushi restaurants. I'm going to butcher some names today, so I apologize in advance. Lepidocybum flavobrunnium. The picture on the top right is the fish. Has a lot of names: white tuna, escolar, butterfish, or snake mackerel, but it is known as the X-lax fish. It contains in its flesh 14 to 25% oil in the form of wax esters. These are not digestible. So consumption or overconsumption of it can cause something called gimpelotoxin or steatorrhea, essentially stomach cramps, rapid loose bowel movements. So you've maybe had this before if you've ordered white tuna at a sushi restaurant. If you only had a little bit of it, you were probably okay. You will be unless you overdo it, basically. It's often mislabeled or misrepresented. Of course, that can be said of a whole lot of types of fish and seafood in the industry. That's a whole other problem you could do a whole presentation on. It's banned in some countries, but not here. It is considered non-toxic or non-lethal, but should not be marketed in interstate commerce. I have run into this at least once out in the field. Feel free to clap your hands on the reaction to let me know if you've ever seen this. It is one of Bobby's favorites, I think she said when we gave this last time. Raw marinated crab. There's a video with this. I'll try to play it. I don't know if it'll work.
I've been dying to try it. Just look at the crab coated with this spicy sauce. First, I just want a chunk of this crab. Bro, the crab on the inside of this is like butter. Right off the bat, this is one of the best crab dishes I've ever had. The sauce is a little spicy. It's also pretty sweet. Just look at it. Look at that lump of crab meat right there. The crazy thing is, through all the spice, you still taste the crab. Some people crack this into the rice. Some extra sauce on the bottom. Just look at that. This was incredibly hyped up and far exceeded the hype. As one of the best new things I've had in 2023, I would give this a 9.4 out of 10. I got it from a place called Crab House in Koreatown. Go check them out.
All right, thank you again to Bobby for doing the video magic. I'm not young or hip enough to do that. But raw marinated crab you will see in Korean cuisine. Just recently tried this for the first time. One of our coworkers here made this for us, actually. They are blue crabs that have been marinated in either a spicy red pepper sauce or soy sauce. They are raw while marinated and also eaten. Cooking process happens. There is danger of ingesting a parasite called a lung fluke when consuming raw crab. So again, this is something that needs a consumer advisory. Oh, technical difficulties, apologies. There we go. Kimchi. Do a reaction for me if you've ever run into this out in the wild. This is becoming pretty common. Kimchi is fermented seasoned vegetables, essentially. It's most often made from Napa cabbage leaves, as pictured here on the left, but really it can be made out of any sort of vegetable. The main components besides the vegetable are usually ginger, garlic, red pepper, and then some type of seafood like fish sauce, salted shrimp. I've even seen oyster varieties. As a fermented food, you may be interested in the process of how they make it. It could just be a store-bought product that they've bought something from their supplier. In that case, it comes from an approved facility. It should be safe enough, nothing else to worry about. But if you find that someone is making this in-house, you may have more questions as to the process that they're using and the intended purpose. For instance, how long they may want to keep it. As basically a chopped up vegetable that is seasoned with all of these very flavorful things, on its own, it's not a whole lot different than something just like coleslaw that you would prepare and keep for 7 days. If they're allowing it to acidify or ferment, we may get into some territory where they're going to keep it longer than that because well-aged kimchis are something of a delicacy, and they get more sour and more pungent, more flavorful the longer that they're allowed to age. If they want to keep it and ferment it, perhaps we would need some sort of special process on file, like a HACCP plan. Rotating meat cones. So al pastor, gyros, shawarma, you may have seen this out in the field. This one's not all that uncommon in Mediterranean cuisine or Mexican cuisine. These are essentially layers and layers of thinly sliced raw meats that are stacked on a vertical spit until they resemble a mountain or a cone of meat there. It is cooked on a vertical broiler. As pictured behind it there, you can see an electrical heating element. Sometimes they'll use a gas flame, and it rotates mechanically and is cooked on every side continuously as it rotates. There are some dangers to point out with something like this, as delicious as it is. As you can imagine, the inner parts near the spit could be sitting in the temperature danger zone for a long period of time, as only the outside surface is exposed to that high heat. So what to look for food safety wise when you're seeing this at an establishment. The meat should be cooked within a total time of 4 hours total. So 4-hour rule. That way we expose the amount of time, limit the amount of time that is exposed to the temperature danger zone. The cooking process must occur continually. We can't stop and start back up. We want to do 4 hours in one go. At the end of the 4 hours, if it hasn't all been finished down to the spit, then you'd cut it all off and cook it, on a flat top or something to 165. Also important not to allow cross-contamination between the cooked meat and the raw layers, so separate sets of utensils are recommended, as well as documentation. It would be good to keep an example down there shows like a time in and time out, temperature recordings, and actions taken. If you see something like this, the establishment's definitely on top of their game. Got a good person in charge. Clap your hands if you've ever seen these before. Pork snoots are somewhat common in our area. You can get them here definitely. And it is just like the name in these pictures imply, it is the snoot or the nose of a pig. They can be prepared in a variety of ways, as pictured. The top left photo here was one that just spoke to me and I put into the presentation. And Bobby was very happy to find out upon researching that that is considered Kansas City style, where the snout is pressure cooked until it becomes like soft and jiggly and served on a sandwich. So you can actually bite right into that. And it's not tough. It must have been cooked long enough. St. Louis style from our area here is more of a crispy, kind of like ends up like a pork rind, whether it's smoked and then fried, as pictured on the bottom two pictures there. It would be crunchy, a lot more like a pork rind. What to watch out for? Just like with any other, raw animal product that's cooked, we want proper temperature control during preparation, storage, proper cooking temperatures and cooling temperatures. But you probably wouldn't worry about that with something that resembles a pork rind. I've never taken a temperature of a pork rind, at least. No water activity. Oh yes, here we go. Give me a clap reaction if you've ever seen beef tongue, known as lingua, or other animal tongues. This one is interesting. You may see these are all pictures of preparation in Mexican cuisine, I believe. So for a tongue, there's a tough outer membrane that needs to be physically removed. I believe no matter how long you cook it, that never becomes chewable. So on the bottom left photo there, you can see it being removed physically with a knife, and then all of the muscle and meat of the tongue is underneath that. It's cooked low and slow for a long period of time until it breaks down and becomes soft. And it's typically griddled then also to crisp it up, like in the top left picture there on the tacos with salsa and avocado. This is one of my favorites. When I see it, I order it. It's quite tasty. Tripe. Show of hands, anybody come across tripe out in the wild? I don't know if I've ever actually encountered this in the course of an inspection, but tripe refers to stomach, essentially, of various animals. It's most commonly eaten in soups and stews. I believe it's quite tough if it's not cooked for quite a long time in the presence of water to break it down. And there are different varieties of stomach. Cows, I think, have 4 stomachs. So these are 2 different stomachs from a cow pictured on the left and the top right here. The one on the left, I believe this is called like honeycomb. The one on the right, I don't know what it's referred to as. I call it the furry one. Looks kind of fuzzy. And on the bottom right there, that's a picture of menudo. That is a stew in Mexican cuisine, I believe, that is eaten with very cooked down tripe so that it becomes soft and edible. Side note, I don't have a picture of this, but haggis, you've probably heard of before. That is a Scottish food made from sheep's stomach. So if you haven't seen it, it's because there's been a ban on it since 1971 by the USDA, having to do with one of the traditional ingredients, not the stomach that it's encased in, but lung. Sheep lung is typically used as an ingredient in the filling of haggis. It's almost like a cased sausage with lots of offal and meat, perhaps oats in it. I've never come across it myself. You can get some canned varieties that are made without the prohibited lung components, but they're quite rare. I've only seen that one time. Yogurt, we all know what yogurt is. Clap your hands there with the react if you've ever seen anyone making their own yogurt in an establishment. I believe that's fairly common in Indian cuisine if you have Indian restaurants in your jurisdiction. We have a few of them. I don't believe that they make their own yogurt, but it is usually a point of pride for their cooking ability and their ingredients. So you'll see this sometimes at Indian restaurants. It can be used as a topping in sauces and marinades, as a drink or a dip. Do make sure if anyone is found making their own yogurt that they are starting with a culture that's from an approved source, meaning a previous batch of something that is ordered from an approved distributor or a product that is used to inoculate your milk, not just a starter that they got from their friend or their grandmother, the family recipe, something like that. We don't want the wrong types of bacteria growing inside of the yogurt, which would be really hard to control once you put it in there. Tofu. You'll probably come across this. It's not too strange. Give me a react if you've seen tofu. I wanted to kind of go through the process of how it's made. I think it's a little bit mysterious sometimes. People don't know exactly what it is. But it starts out with soybeans, which you may have known. What you may not have known is that it's a very similar process to making cheese out of milk from a cow, for instance. So there are proteins inside of the soybean that are water soluble, and when you make soy milk, essentially by cooking, grinding, straining liquid out of the beans, you can coagulate and precipitate the bean proteins out of the milk, the same way you would do with cow's milk and precipitating out the curd. They can use calcium sulfate to do this. You'll see that's often an ingredient added to your store-bought tofu, and that is gypsum. So yeah, that's what drywall is made out of. I always thought that was quite interesting. And once you add that and get the right, heat, temperature requirements going, it will precipitate and curdle out all of this solid that you can see. That is strained, sometimes just with cheesecloth or other devices, to get water out, to get to different levels of firmness. Pictured on the bottom right, there is a whole variety of different firmnesses of tofu. In the top right, you can see like a very wet tofu. It's got a lot of its water that has not been strained out. Probably eat that with a spoon. On the bottom are the blocks that you may have seen in Chinese restaurants, for instance. They have some of their water strained out to different levels. And then it can be strained out and almost, well, it can be completely dried. Those products become almost kind of like a pasta, and they can be rehydrated and boiled and used. A lot of semi-strained ones are used to deep fry to get a fried kind of tofu product. You can see that texture on the one in the top right next to the bowl. They can be pressed and smoked or seasoned with other things. To the left of the fried one, you can see there's obviously some seasoning or smoke going on there. And the one on the far left on the top, I believe that is tempeh. That's probably a soybean product similar to tofu, but it is deep fried almost to like a cracker texture. Pain. Okay, this one I'm confident that most people haven't seen before. This was the first smell sample that I was really excited to pass around. But this is also known as asafoetida. It is used in Indian cuisine for flavor. It has a lot of names because of its pungent smell, stinking gum, devil's dirt. But I found that it is actually related to carrot and fennel. It is the rhizome of the plant, so that's something that grows underground as a storage mechanism for the plant. Think like potatoes or tubers, and has a very potent sulfuric smell, and it can impart odor onto anything and everything around it. I ruined my entire spice cabinet with this the first time I bought it and put it unprotected in with all of my other spices. Everything else started to smell like it. It's used as a substitute for garlic and onion when prohibited by religion in India. There are some types of religions that don't eat onion or garlic or any sort of alum. And this is used as a replacement for that. My wife said that it smelled like an onion roasted over an open tire fire, so I was not allowed to keep it in the house. I had to take it outside to the garage. The sample that I passed around is in a mason jar, 3 Ziploc bags, and the entire bottle that it came in is wrapped in a lot of saran wrap, and you can still smell it without opening it. So that's how pungent it is. There's a video for this one. I kind of want to skip it because there's no subtitles. Let's see. It was also quite loud last time I played it. Here is the process of them making it. It's growing underground there, and they're cutting into it. You can see the kind of sappy, sticky substance that comes out of it. So it ends up as a powder in those small white bottles. You'll see it sometimes at Indian grocery stores. And if you've eaten Indian food, you may have come across it if you've ever tasted a flavor that's similar to garlic or onion, but not. Black salt is another seasoning you'll find in Indian cuisine. You may find this in an Indian kitchen. Don't be afraid if you see this purplish black looking salt. That is a traditional seasoning that they use. The smell in it is due to the sulfur content. A mineral called greigite, I believe, when I looked into it, is cooked with salt in a kiln and then aged. So with the sulfur content, it does have sort of rotten egg, kind of boiled egg smell. It's pretty pungent, but used sparingly adds quite a bit of dimension to dishes. They'll sprinkle it on fruit. It's used in sauces and chutneys. Ube. This one's an up-and-coming star. You will eventually see this, I'm quite sure, depending on your area. I've already run into this once or twice in our jurisdiction. But ube is a purple yam of sorts. Discoria alata, I believe, is the scientific name. It's often confused with Okinawan sweet potatoes or taro, which are also kind of root vegetables that have purple color to them. It's the violet or purple color hue is due to the presence of anthocyanins, which are phytochemicals, antioxidants for our purposes, found in the plant. And it's used in many sweet applications typically. So beverages like milk tea or boba tea, you may have some establishments selling things like that in your jurisdiction. It's a popular ice cream flavor. And I was at a local coffee shop that was experimenting with the one in the top right corner there on some drinks they were thinking of adding to the menu. So you will see this someday, I believe. It has a kind of sort of like vanilla smell to it, a scent. If you open this up, it's very purple, so it will stain anything that it touches. But yeah, it's like a kind of a sweet potato vanilla smell. Pandan. This is also found in Southeast Asia and South Asia. Pandanus amaryllophyllus, or something to that effect. Top left picture. It's a tropical plant. You can see the leaves on the plant there. It has a floral, sweet, grassy vanilla scent. And I was able to find frozen leaves as pictured in the center there. But it's used in, again, sweets, baked goods, desserts, lots of kind of jellies and jam type substances, waffles. It has a great flavor to it. To me, it smells like coconut and vanilla mixed together. Okay, cheese. This is a video I'll play about the most dangerous cheese in the world.
So part one, the world's most dangerous cheese. All right, you're looking at the world's most dangerous cheese, which was given that name by the Guinness World Records in 2009. It's illegal to buy and sell here in America and the EU, and Italy itself actually banned it more than 50 years ago, and the EU about 20 years ago. So what makes it illegal? Well, maybe these little guys will give you a hint. Yep, those are maggots, and yep, they're alive in the cheese. Before the costume artist gets to this point with the maggots, it starts as normal pecorino cheese made from sheep's milk, and they leave it outside with part of the rind missing. That way, cheese flies will intentionally land and lay their larvae in the cheese. Once hatched, the larvae will start to eat through the cheese, and the acid from the maggot's digestive system will make the cheese very soft. And by the time the cheese is ready for consumption, it will have thousands of maggots. Having maggots in the food goes against a lot of regulations here in the US and EU, and certain scientists argue that larvae can survive the stomach acid and actually live in the intestines. Big question is, would you try it?
So do the clap reaction if you'd try this. I don't even know if I would try this one. I'm pretty adventurous. At least one person here. Okay. So it's known as Kasu Marzu, Kasu Fresigu, depending on the dialect where you are. As he said in the video, this is a rotten, putrid sheep's milk cheese, deliberately has fly maggots in it. The maggots are known to jump. I believe it might be a sign of freshness or something. Photo credit here to my friend from Sardinia who took the picture on the top and tried it. I believe they said that if the maggots can jump out at you, it's a sign of freshness. This is illegal and banned even in the homeland where it comes from originally. So this is something that you need to know a guy to find over there. If you ever find this here, call me. I'd be interested to find out how it got over here.
Things been.
Okay, Aki. This one had to go in the presentation just due to the bizarre appearance. So this is a fruit, the national fruit of Jamaica, and it has a reputation for being potentially fatal. This one is known to give tourists in Jamaica hospitalized sometimes. It opens up and almost looks like an eye or something. Once it does open up, it should be safe to eat, but while they're enclosed, like the ones behind the picture in the foreground open up like that. In the background, there are some closed ones. While they're closed, the plant contains hypoglycin A toxin or soapberry toxins. They disrupt blood glucose production, so they could put you in a coma. Ackee and saltfish, I believe, is the national dish of Jamaica, and I was able to find some canned ackee that's from obviously an approved processing plant that would not be putting any unripe or dangerous ones in this canned product. The recipe there is shown on the back: saltfish, oil, aromatics, Scotch bonnet pepper, of course, tomatoes, ackee, and some seasoning. Import of the raw fruit has been banned here since 1973, so the canned thing is just about as good as you're going to get. Cured egg yolks. You may find these if you have any high-end restaurants in your jurisdiction, people that are into molecular gastronomy or anything like that. There are several different ways to cure egg yolks. Commonly, you'll see them basically placed into salt, where they're allowed to have the salt draw out moisture, lower water activity, and they become much more solid and are grated on top of things like pastas. It's almost like a cheese when you think about it, grating it on top of pasta. Can also be done in soy sauce. I believe one of these pictures was from Bobby. She made that homemade herself. That ends up with more of a jammy kind of texture. That is not apricot jam in the top left. That's one of the cured egg yolks spread on a piece of bread. And again, they're cured in brine or soy sauce in this process. So if you find these, it's a raw animal product, they may want a consumer advisory about this. Or maybe they started with pasteurized egg yolk. You'll have to talk with them to find out. Speaking of eggs, here's an interesting one called the 100-year-old egg. or a century egg. Okay, some people have seen this one. It's often found in Chinese cuisine. So if you have Chinese restaurants that serve this porridge pictured in the bottom right there, it's a condiment that's put on top of that often. So you may see them. Not to worry, this is not a process that would typically be done at the restaurant. So you wouldn't need to worry about it as much. It should be ordered from a supplier. It's not that it takes 100 years to make it, actually. I think the process can be done in a matter of weeks or months, but duck, chicken, or quail eggs are preserved in a mixture of clay, ash, salt, quicklime, and rice hulls for weeks or months. It changes the proteins. It allows them to break down. We'll see the whites turn this kind of like a golden brown glass color. The yolk can be almost greenish black in the center when you cut it open. Let me play the video here.
Have you had century egg or peidan? Nowadays, they're typically packaged in a container like this. Peidan originated in China hundreds of years ago. To preserve their shelf life, eggs were preserved in a mixture that contains clay and ash. Peidan is also referred to as 1,000-year-old egg, but contrary to these names, they're neither 100 nor 1,000 years old. The preservation process usually takes several weeks, turning the golden yolk into a greenish-gray hue and the whites into a dark brown jelly. While peidan may be an acquired taste to many, they are creamy and pairs very well with congee. They're a delicacy in the Asian cuisine, almost like aged cheese. Give it a try sometime.
Bobby did procure some of these for us to try. I was not a fan. Kind of tasted like the way a wet dog smells to me. So it wasn't my favorite. I had one of these here in my sample bottles, but it appears to have melted. The only thing intact is the yolk. So if you let them sit around, they kind of disintegrate. We still have a few in the refrigerator though. Here's a little bit of a departure, some Chinese cooking techniques. This item pictured on the right here, potassium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate solution, is a very basic, meaning like a high pH food additive, similar to baking soda. It's used to change the condition and texture of wheat products like doughs or dumpling wrappers, noodles, or cakes. The sodium carbonate is the traditional ingredient that is responsible for the texture and the somewhat yellow color of noodles that you may be familiar with, like ramen noodles or other types of noodles that you'll see, lo mein, and those sorts of things. These days, the presence of that yellow color is often enhanced by like a yellow food coloring additive to really make it pop. And I would be surprised if you ever saw anyone using this, because it would mean that they're making pasta or noodles from scratch, which in and of itself is not a very cost-effective or time-efficient thing to do in a restaurant. But you may see these sorts of food additives in a Chinese restaurant. I've never seen it personally, but we've all seen baking soda, which is what sodium bicarbonate is. Speaking of which, another technique called velveting is used to tenderize meats in Chinese restaurants. Do a clap reaction or something if you've ever seen meat stored in containers that look like the top picture at a Chinese restaurant when you're doing an inspection there. Didn't know what that was at first, but when it comes down to it, they're being velveted, which is kind of like marinating and tenderizing them. Could be a combination of baking soda, cornstarch, or egg white, or all of the above. And it's responsible for the texture that you find in the final cooked product of meats and stir fries. If you've ever tried to make them at home, they don't come out that same glossy kind of tender texture from the Chinese takeout. It's probably because you skipped this step. They'll also do a process called passing through oil, where they are par fried. So you take these marinated meats and just sort of deep fry them or perhaps blanch them. That way they're partially pre-cooked and can go into the main stir fry process at an appropriate time so that they're not overcooked, because they're using very high temperatures, as you've probably seen at inspecting Chinese restaurants. This could be considered a partial cooking process for a raw animal product or meat. It depends on how they're doing it. You'd have to look at times and temperatures. If that's the case, there could be some additional documentation needed put on file with the health department. Szechuan peppercorns. We have a little video about these. I'll play it first.
Szechuan peppercorns. Absolutely necessary if cooking Szechuanese food. It adds the citrusy brightness as well as a really famous numbing sensation on your tongue. What it does to get that sensation is it blocks the touch receptors on your tongue, which is different from taste. And interestingly enough, the touch receptors are what feels pain. And pain is how we register spiciness. So you know how you have taste buds that are responsible for registering saltiness, sweetness, bitterness, umami, and sourness? Well, when you taste spicy food, that is actually just like pain. And that's what makes Szechuan peppercorns so great and Szechuan food so great too, because it numbs your tongue a little bit to the receptors of pain so that you are able to eat and continually eat spicy food more and more. That's why when you eat spicy Szechuanese food, you generally can't stop.
So Szechuan peppercorn, pictured to the right, there are a couple different varieties, is the outer coating of the seed husk from the prickly ash tree. The import of these was banned between 1965 and 2005. There was a citrus canker in their crops that, if it contaminated things over here, could have been devastating to our orange groves. But fear not, if you find them nowadays, they've likely been heat treated, so the critter that was growing on them shouldn't be there anymore. On the bottom right, you can see the seeds. The seed husk is the only part that is used if you're buying it and you find the little black seeds as a sign of poor quality, because those are practically like stones, very gritty. Infused oils. You may run across these in all sorts of different cuisines, chili oils, especially in Asian cuisines. Spices, herbs, and vegetables can be infused to impart flavor into oil through a variety of methods. It could be a heating method, which is fairly common. But do remember that if garlic is involved, that raw garlic and oil mixtures that are not modified in some way, meaning cooked or they're pH buffered, they could be possibly a growth medium for the botulism toxin. So they're considered TCS. If the oil is heated, that should kill off the spores. If they're keeping it refrigerated, that's good too. Agar agar. This is a thickener derived from seaweed. You can buy it as a powder. I've only ever run across it, like the picture in the bottom left. They're like blocks of brightly colored styrofoam is what they feel like. But if you put it into water, it dissolves. It can be used to make lots of desserts and sweets. The viral, I think it was called the teardrop or water droplet cake, pictured in the top right, was used. They used agar agar to make that. And it's used as a growth medium in petri dishes. So cooked plant matter, it can support growth of little critters. Palm oil. If you run across this, this is an oil from a vegetable, but it's very thick, more like an animal lard or fat, kind of like coconut oil. It's used in African, Brazilian, and other cuisines, and it comes from the palm tree fruit. It's used to replace hydrogenated oils, so you'll find that palm oil is an ingredient in tons and tons of store-bought, shelf-stable goods like baked goods, cookies, crackers, those sorts of things. It's usually bleached and deodorized for those purposes, so it won't have this nice red color to it, which is due to the presence of vitamins. And it has a lot of uses for both food and industrial purposes like cosmetic and biofuels. There's a lot of deforestation happening in many parts of the world, where they basically tear down or burn down forests to plant palm because we just use it in so many products. Injera. This is a sourdough type pancake used in Ethiopian cuisine, made from teff flour, pictured on the right there. It's often cut with cheaper flour as well because teff is quite expensive, but it is fermented and it does very much taste sourdough. It's quite sour, in fact. It is used as both a serving vessel and as an eating utensil. You pick up pieces of it and eat it with your hands, and all of the little dishes, as you can see pictured in the top left, are plated on a big piece of the bread. Miso, doenjang, soybean paste, whatever name you want to call it. There are many types of soybean paste out there all around the world. They take blocks of the soybeans that are salted, mashed, pressed, and aged, and inoculated with Aspergillus oryzae. The resulting product is a stable paste, like the top right picture there. That's very flavorful, very salty. It's used in sauces, soups, dressings, a lot of applications for it. Tamari soy sauce is a byproduct of making miso. So as you can imagine, when they're salting and straining liquid out of this, it's one of the liquids that comes out of soy sauce. Piqui, this is an interesting fruit. I have a sample of it here. It has a cheesy, kind of sweet, fruity aroma that some people hate and some people love. It's quite interesting because the inner part of this fruit is full of wooden spines, like the top right picture there. So it can be very dangerous to eat. It's cooked often in savory dishes, and it can be made into candies and other sorts of sweets. It's a love it or hate it type of thing. Cashew apple. This is a fruit that is an accessory fruit to the cashew nut. As pictured here, you can see the familiar shape of the cashew on the bottom. But did you know that an apple grows attached to it? I did not know that. And I have a sample of it here. The juice of the cashew apple has a sweet, strong smell, kind of like apple juice laced with gasoline. I don't know if there are some aromatic hydrocarbons that just are naturally present in the fruit, but you can definitely smell that smell very similar to gasoline. The fruit itself is very perishable, so you won't find it much outside of the areas where it grows. It doesn't do well with shipping or storage, but it's often made into a juice or an alcohol, chutneys. Another interesting thing is it has an oil compound in the shell down there that is similar to poison ivy. It'll cause contact dermatitis, so shell them at your own risk. Cassava. Cassava or yucca or manioc has a lot of names, and I used to think they were all different things, but I believe that they're all the same thing. It's a root, so again, think like a potato, grows underground, and it can be processed to create tapioca starch. And it can be used to make all sorts of things in all sorts of different types of cuisines all around the world. Cakes, breads, mashed potato-like dishes, boba pearls, cheese breads. So yes, this is used kind of like wheat flour in some applications. It's kind of used like semolina wheat flour to make boba pearls, like almost like a pasta type thing when you cook it. Fufu is pictured in the top right there. It's something that's kind of stretchy, and you dip it into kind of like the injera, you dip it into flavorful sauces and stews, and it soaks up all of that flavor. These are some videos of people making cassava. Let's play this one. So that was a video of someone making, I think that was the fufu out of cassava. This video I'll skip for time purposes, but you can basically use it to make from scratch boba pearls, like on the cutting board down there below him. You probably won't see anyone using this to make these things from scratch. It's labor intensive, and you can buy the boba pearls, like a dried pasta product that just is boiled and cooked. Same thing with fufu. You can buy a powdered product that you just cook with water, sort of like instant mashed potatoes. Okay, genipapo. This is a fruit from the Amazon in Brazil. The unripe fruit of Genipa americana yields a liquid used for tattoos, skin painting, and insect repellent. It is edible though. Cultivated fruits are used in preserves and drinks and jellies. I have a sample of this here. Kind of smells like a dark fruit, if you can imagine. Prunes, raisins, dried figs, that sort of dark fruit taste. The picture on the left is the fresh, although this one looks pretty ripe, fruit, and the one on the right is like a candied version of it. Here's one, the Brazilian grape tree, and the fruit is called jabuticaba. This one is very interesting because the grape grows directly on the bark of the tree. At a distance, it looks like a tree covered with a swarm of beetles or something. It can be eaten raw. The fruit, again, is very perishable though, so good luck finding it. But you might be able to find it in the form of a jelly, jam, juice, or wine. I have an extract of it here. And in that form, again, it kind of smells like dark fruit, raisins, prunes, that kind of thing. Fresh one, I've never tried. I've tried to find this a lot of times though. Fenugreek seeds and leaves. Again, this is common in Indian cuisine. The seeds, which are used as a spice, the leaves, which are used as an herb, or just like a green leafy vegetable. Can be used in curries, desserts, and sauces. You may see this in Mediterranean restaurants or Indian restaurants. The seeds have a very, it's kind of a sweet scent to them, similar to maple syrup. The seeds are all actually used in the process of making imitation maple syrup flavor. So if you buy the maple syrup that is basically made out of corn syrup with added color and flavor, those flavors sometimes originate from fenugreek seeds. The vegetable, it can be cooked or dried. So as a dried, it's more used like an herb or a garnish. And you cook the fresh version almost kind of like spinach or mustard greens. Horchata. This is a creamy plant-based beverage found in Mexican and Latin American cuisines. Pictured here in a Mexican restaurant would be made out of rice milk, essentially. Traditional Spanish versions are made with tiger nuts, however. You may see this in the form of a powder at grocery stores sometimes that you just mix with water. It has a lot of added sugar and usually flavored with like cinnamon or cardamom, I think. But you would want to keep that refrigerated. Tepache, another beverage you may find at a Mexican restaurant. It is a fermented beverage and it is made out of pineapple scraps. Basically wild spontaneous fermentation. The outside of pineapple just has naturally occurring fauna and yeasts and things on it. So if you mix it with a little bit of food for them, some sugar, maybe some flavors like cinnamon, you can submerge them in water and it will ferment on its own. This is a picture of one that I made. I made it to great success one time. It was delicious, sweet, bubbly. And I think in this actual picture, it just turned into vinegar. So if you like pineapple vinegar, that one was good, but I didn't like it. That's the problem with spontaneous fermentation. You have no idea what you're going to end up with. Butterfly pea flower. This was one of Bobby's slides. Play this video.
Butterfly pea flower. So here is part one of extracting the color, making a refreshing drink with it, and becoming a magician. You'll understand it then. I like using 10 dried flowers for every 1 cup of water. Pour the flowers into the cup and add hot water and steep for 5 minutes. Strain the flowers and refrigerate it until chilled. Add ice to a glass and start pouring. This is the magic part. Squeeze half a lime into the mixture. Now, oohs and ahs should begin. Well, this will at least impress the kids. Does anyone know the science behind the color change?
So butterfly pea flower you may find at fancy bars. It's often used to do this cool color change trick when acidity is added. Yeah, like I said, if you've got any fancy bars, you might find them using something like this. Make sure that they're getting this from an approved source and not picking it themselves.
There are some.
At that same bar, you can also watch out for these two, orange blossom water and rose water. I have samples of these. Rose water, this is literally made from roses, byproduct of the perfume industry that is used in all sorts of applications for both food and beverages. Many desserts in Middle Eastern and Indian countries will put it in baked goods and other sorts of desserts. Orange blossom water is commonly added to fancy bar beverages. I believe this is a component of grenadine. And they both smell delightful. I wish I could pass that around to you. The rose one smells like rose and orange blossom smells like orange blossom. So would you try any of these foods? I know we covered some interesting, scary, maybe even dangerous ones. But that's all I have for you today. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. Anyone ever wants to contact me with questions, feel free to call the Madison County Health Department and ask for Lonnie. They'll get you to me.
Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Did anybody want to unmute or ask questions? Okay, if we don't have anything, Lonnie, thank you so much. It's a very interesting presentation. I will go ahead and share a video from IEHA with part of the announcement if you weren't here for the morning with regards to the fall conference. So if you give me just 1 second, and while the video is playing, we'll go ahead and transition over to getting our new presenters together. Thank you so much, Lonnie.
You're welcome.
And while we're waiting, while our video is kind of cycling through, this will be the last cycle. I'll end it here, and then I will transition over so our next speakers can get started. Okay, do we have, looking for Nick Frillman and Josh McAtee. And please correct me if I'm not saying your first or last names correctly.
Yep, I'm unmuted and you should be able to hear me and see me.
Awesome. Yes, yes, I can.
I'm here too. This is Josh.
Okay, hi, welcome. So we got about 2 minutes or so. If you guys wanted to, you can go ahead and pull up your slides. You should be able to share with no problems. And then you just let us know when you're ready to get started and we'll transition right into our next presentation.
Okay.
I think we'll need that extra like minute and a half we have. So Josh, if you're ready to get started, maybe we could both do a quick intro and then roll with your slides.
Absolutely. It works for me.
Okay, awesome.
You want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Josh McAtee and I'm with Wild Growth Gourmet Mushrooms. I'm here with Nick from the Extension Office. I'm going to be talking about the mushroom farming aspect with gourmet mushrooms. Nick, if you want to.
Yep, my name is Nick Frillman. Hey everybody, glad to be here. I'm the local food systems and small farms educator with Illinois Extension, based in the Bloomington, Illinois office, but I cover 3 counties, McLean, Livingston, and Woodford. Been with Extension for 3 years, and my bit of the talk today will center around the Illinois Mushrooms website that recently launched in November, covering a couple of in the works additions to the website, and then a surprise topic that I'm sure will raise a couple eyebrows, but hopefully be well received by the end of it. So without further ado, I'll let Josh rock and roll.
All right. And I'm going to bring up my slides and hopefully I can, oh, come on. I say that and then here it goes. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Everybody see that okay? All right.
Yes.
I will have chat up. So if you have any questions as we go through this, by all means, I'm going to zip through these slides pretty quickly because I want to leave room for questions, but also I'm fighting the crud that's going around. So I'm going to try to get through this without coughing too much. As I said, I'm Josh McAtee with Wild Growth Gourmet Mushrooms. I'm going to be here to talk about the gourmet mushroom farming, the methodology, and the good ag practices that we use. I'm also going to touch base on a few other things, including things that would be relevant for like the public health sector at the end. And again, I'm going to try to zip through these. If I miss anything, please, by all means, throw it in the chat. If it'll cooperate. There we go. Again, just a quick background on me. I was raised out here in Mercer County, Illinois, and then I went off to join the Coast Guard where I was a marine science technician. And then I went into as a consultant as an environmental specialist after that. And then I've been in business management in various industries before finding out I could do this full time, which really has always been my passion. Thanks to my family being big outdoorsmen and giant morel mushroom hunters, which I think everybody in Illinois is that was raised out here in the woods. I've established Wild Growth in 2020. Great timing, by the way. And I've been doing it full time ever since. So what makes a mushroom gourmet? And we're going to get into each of these here in a minute. But when you hear common mushroom, we're referring to Agaricus bispora species, which are the white button, your cremini, otherwise known as baby bella or portobello. They're typically grown on mulch beds, but we'll get into that here in a second. When you hear gourmet, you're typically hearing species that are grown on hardwood in the environment. They would normally be on trees and stuff like that, digesting wood. Some examples of that we'll get into next. And then occasionally you'll hear the term medicinal. Usually people are referring to safe to eat, but inedible options like reishi, turkey tail, cordyceps, chaga, they're not exactly palatable, but they do have compounds that people are looking for to be putting in the supplement market. Some examples of gourmet mushrooms you'll typically see are going to be oyster varieties like blue oyster here. The black pearl on the other end is also an oyster species, but it's a hybrid. Lion's mane, shiitake, and beech. There's a little beech coming up. Just want to throw it in there because I think it's cute, but I'm weird. So I think mushrooms are cute. Styles of mushroom farming. These are the ones you're going to see. And bed farming is typically done with the agaricus species. You're never going to see that with the gourmet species specifically, with some exceptions outdoor we'll get into. Block farming, otherwise known as bag farming, is the gourmet industry almost exclusively. And we're going to go into each of these a little bit. Outdoor farming can be done with gourmet species, obviously, as you see here with the shiitake. They typically mean log farming. Again, bed farming is pretty much strictly for agaricus. I don't do this, so I'm not going to try to speak for the industry, but it's probably the oldest industry, and as far as mushrooms go, that you'll see the most of throughout the United States and the world. The gourmet industry is catching up fast, though, so I shouldn't say you're going to see it the most. And we'll go into this more, but typically they're done with much different substrate than the other block farming. The current MGAT, by the way, put out by Penn State, mostly focuses on this because, again, it's been the traditional industry that had the biggest sales impact across the United States. Outdoor farming, again, a quick overview. It's the oldest method. And if you get over into the Pacific Rim, especially in Japan and China, Vietnam, they still primarily do it this way, especially with varieties like shiitake. And that's where they actually take hardwood logs and inoculate them with the mushroom they want to grow, and they'll make them root out. You'll also see outdoor farming done with morel and things like chanterelle. It's hard, you're going to have a tough time finding pictures on that because the IP is pretty strict. That's why I've got my competitor Josh up here, also named Josh. Yes, he's over in Iowa. That's the only picture I could find that he released to the public about his morel beds. We're kind of tight-lipped about it, but if you get talking to us, especially if you're from the state, yeah, we'll talk to you about it, how we do it. Block farming, excuse me. Again, also known as bag farming, and that's because of the specialty type of bags that we use to grow in. Those bags can be sterilized under pressure sterilization, so they can stand high heat as well. Again, these are grown in the wild, naturally on trees, usually dead and decaying, or bad spots on a tree that are already dead. They have highly complex life cycles. They're highly tuned and sensitive to changes in their environment, such as temperature, moisture and humidity, air exchange. Each species is very unique in its own right. So again, if you're going to be a gourmet grower, you got to be a mycology nerd. And just so everybody's on the same page, mycology is the term for if you're a mushroom. If you study mushrooms and fungus, you're a mycologist, similar to like a biologist. That's our title. So, but if you are growing all these species, you got to understand their life cycles pretty intimately. So you're going to be a mushroom nerd to really get into this industry. Now in our farming, when we go to farm, you're typically going to see each of these stages I'm about to get into, and everything starts in the lab. Kind of to reach back to the last to Lonnie's presentation, when he was talking about agar, those plates on the right, if you ever hear us talking about agar, we're actually talking about those Petri dishes. So that's an example of what he meant by Petri dishes. And what we do is we'd start with either spores, a clone of a mushroom, or cultured mycelium, and we grow them on either liquid culture, like the gentleman on the left has, or these agar plates. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to isolate just the mushroom that we want to grow and make sure that we got healthy specimens. And then from there, we go into what we call spawn. And we're almost usually talking about either grain or sawdust spawn, and almost always grain. You'll see millet, oat, and rye, variations of those used a lot. And we hydrate it, and then we bag it in these bags is what I was talking about here on the right. And then we put it through pressure sterilization, or it may not be a pressure sterilization, we put it through pasteurization as well. But we'll kill any and all possible contaminants. And when I mean contaminants, I mean anything that's not, anything living in that bag. We just want the mushroom to propagate on the grain. So from there, once it's cool, we will take it in the lab and combine the last two things I showed you by putting the agar or the liquid mycelium into the bags to colonize the grain. You'll see on the bag on the left, that was cooked grain that's been bagged. And on the right, after a few weeks, in this case, black pearl, the mycelium will colonize it and start digesting the grain. Park that for a second. Then we're also at the same time putting our substrate together. And again, in this industry, you're typically going to see hardwood sawdust, sometimes wood chips, but rarely. Usually we're going after sawdust. And then we'll supplement it with something like soy hull or cottonseed hull or something else that's usually a what would otherwise be trash in the ag industry that they may incorporate into feed and stuff. We'll also use it because it's got low enough nitrogen content, but still have the other good carbohydrates that the mushrooms like. We put those into the same type of specialty bags. And again, we either are putting them, some farmers will do pasteurization. In our case, we do them through low pressure sterilization, like this barrel you see here, we call it Bubba barrels. Weird terms for these things. And once they have been thoroughly pasteurized or sterilized, we take them into the lab, where again, we add the spawn now to these blocks. And excuse me, the pictures here, you're seeing my lab in particular. These rooms are going to be as sterile as possible. They are treated like any other lab because we only want the mushroom to get into this process, because at any point, any kind of contamination such as another mold or a competing mushroom gets introduced, it can throw our process out of whack and kill the mushroom before we even get a single harvest. So we're pretty anal here in the lab. From there, we roll these into what we call incubation. Again, depending on the mushroom, can take a few weeks to a few months of incubating to allow their life cycle to get to the point where they're ready to go into the grow house and actually grow mushrooms. So shiitake is probably the longest edible gourmet. That takes about a couple of months to get to the stage where we're ready to put it into the grow house. I shamelessly stole this out of a farm in Chicago that was on their social media because I really like their setup, and it shows just how many of these blocks can get rolled into an incubation chamber. And again, these are still typically climate and temperature controlled because we want the mushrooms to do, or the mycelium to do as well as it can. Now, once you get into the grow house proper, again, there's similar setups to what you've seen probably in greenhouses, but they're going to be a little more tightly controlled. But we bring the blocks in, and we either, depending on the mushroom, may take them out of the bag completely, but most of the time we're just going to cut into it, because again, we're simulating a tree, and we want that that mushroom to grow just like it was growing on a log or a tree. So we just cut into it a little bit. They sense the oxygen, and in their mind, they're going, hey, I reached the outside of the tree, and they will start growing a mushroom. And then here you're seeing varieties of oyster, and chestnut is the little brown ones there. But you have pink oyster and blue oyster also there. And these grow houses are going to be tightly controlled as far as humidity, air exchange, and temperatures. We will vary all of that throughout their life cycles to get the best yield possible. You're also going to notice that if there's another place where growers get very anal about their cleanliness, it's going to be the grow house. Again, the good and bad part of this industry is that you need everything to be as clean as possible. These mushrooms can be very temperamental, and you don't want any other contamination to get in at that stage, or you just simply are not going to get mushrooms. It just comes down to that. So can hurt you if you're not as clean as a janitor. I always say that if you want to get in this industry, you better have a background in sanitation or janitorial services, because that's mostly what you're doing is cleaning. When we get to the harvest stage, those in that picture, we're about ready to harvest. And we are going to harvest by hand. There's no mechanical equipment typical for this type of industry that I've seen. That's economical or feasible. You're going to package them into bulk bins for cold storage, like the gentleman there in the middle is doing.
Boop, boop, bop.
Or they're going to go into boxes or containers. You put into cold storage, they're going to go on to their clients from there. Storage for the mushrooms are like other produce. We want them between 34 and 39 degrees. They're going to need to be in breathable containers because the mushrooms do need to breathe, similar to like berries, I believe. And when they're in the retail side, they shouldn't be kept under misting in retail displays, because mushrooms, they're still alive. They would like to myceliate and try to continue to grow. And if they're kept under misting displays, that also can introduce other bacteria onto them, which is not good, but also they'll try to actually continue to grow. I mentioned this word a couple of times, so I want to clarify. When you're talking to mushroom growers, you're going to hear us talk about contamination. So make sure you, especially for the public health inspectors, we know what you're thinking of, but what we're thinking of may be completely different. Contamination for us, like I was indicating in those other slides, means a competing, usually mold or fungus, is trying to get in and eat this wonderful substrate that we have put together for our mushrooms. And it is our mission to keep that out. So if you hear us talking about contamination, we may only mean like trichoderma mold, like a green bread mold, something like that, because those are the types of things that can eat this type of substrate. Rarely are we talking about bacteria or other more dangerous types of things like salmonella or staph, listeria, because those aren't going to target the same type of food sources that we're working with. You will have to be more mindful of that if you are working with an agaricus farm or anything that's using higher nitrogen and different types of mulch beds, because it's going to have different nutrient amounts that may be inviting for those types of things. That harvesting cycle for us is the most critical point where we're thinking of both things. We have to think of in terms of sterility for the mushroom themselves, but we're also thinking about sanitation, because this is the point where if you are going to introduce anything that's harmful for the public, it's because of a bad sanitation practices, like wear gloves, wear masks, hair nets, that type of thing. It's the best practice possible. For God's sakes, wash your hands after you use the bathroom. Wash your hands all day. In our world, we're always washing. So, but if we see anything on imports that tend to carry over, like listeria, I seem to see a lot through imports, it's because they don't have the same sanitary practices that we do, and we don't have you folks keeping track of that. And bed farming, yeah, you should be treating it the same as soil veggies for that reason. Anything that could be coming through the soil may also be in those bed farms. I'm going to talk a little bit about the contamination you may see on the shelf and the chillers at restaurants too. Blotch is a big one. It is a bacterial blotch. If you've ever gotten white button at the store and they get brown and they start getting slimy, it's blotch. On the gourmet side, a few can be susceptible to that a little bit, including like king trumpet and sometimes other oyster species. White button is the most well known. On the right is mold. It's harder to see in this picture, but that's green trick mold. Again, not harmful per se to humans, but it accelerates rot and invites in other things. And also it's a good indicator that something's wrong, whether it was on the farm side or maybe the chiller isn't operating it correctly, or they just holding onto the produce way too long. You may see molds like that. This is what, if we hear me say degradation, it's that slimy degradation. They're unappealing in our world, and it means that there's something seriously wrong. Usually if you're seeing degradation on mushrooms of this degree, they did not rotate their produce correctly, or there's something wrong with their chiller or retail display, that it's way too warm, that you're seeing these types of things happen. But again, if you see it on the farm side, that's really bad. You should not be seeing that on our side. We should be controlling that. The other thing I did mention earlier, I see this does happen a lot, and we get phone calls or retailers that are curious. Sometimes you'll see white fluffiness on the mushrooms. And 99% of the time, it's mycelium. It's the mushroom itself trying to grow. When we package our mushrooms, we'd have to let them breathe, but also they're going to be shedding off humidity, and it may be in the packaging. And that mycelium, the mushroom itself, will pick that up and go, oh, well, I can grow here, and they'll try to grow new mycelial network. It's not anything bad, but it doesn't look good on a retail shelf and makes it difficult to sell. It's usually an indicator too, like they have gotten too warm. So the mycelium has hit a point where it can start to regrow. So either the restaurant or retailer has been keeping them too warm, or again, maybe an indicator there's something wrong with their process somewhere, their chillers. Additional resources. Again, you're going to talk to Nick. He is a great resource, the University of Illinois Extension Office, for anything mushroom related, mushroom grower related. Penn State's mushroom good ag practice. University of Cornell has some great the extension for small farms has some great mushroom knowledge. And then I always really advocate, talk to us. This industry right now is dominated by the mom and pop growers that have been doing this for a while, and they're very passionate. You got to have passionate mycologists to get into this industry. So until corporate interests take this field over right now, we are excited to talk, and we are always wanting to do better as owners. So please talk to us, and then if you have any good advice or see anything wrong, we want to know about it. But we'll happily talk about fungus all day long too, if you have questions. And then here's my contact information. If you ever need to get a hold of me or have some nuanced questions, something pops in your head, by all means, take my information down. Cell phone is the best way to reach me. I'm always in the grow house. You're almost always going to go to voicemail in the office line. You can also email me at wildgrowthmushrooms@gmail.com, and I'm the one that monitors the email. So, are there any questions I can help you with at the moment? Good. All right. All right, Nick, if you want to.
Yeah, I just wanted to give one more minute for anybody that wanted to ask you a question, because Josh is super knowledgeable on cultivation. Really appreciate having worked with him on a couple of different things now. This and one other presentation, as well as the development of the website. I'll show you in a minute, but any questions for Josh before we move on? And if not, we can hold some time. We're going to hold some time at the end for questions as well. Okay, there was a question in the chat. Josh, what is a certified mushroom expert?
It's a great term. Certified mushroom expert is a title somebody gave themselves. That's going to be the short answer. Again, there's not a lot of degree paths for mycology in the United States, so you're going to see very few true mycologists that were not gifted the label themselves. You'll see I avoid calling myself a mycologist, even though I've been doing this studying mycology for over 30 years. Because humility keeps me from doing that. But again, I do, get called up as the region's, my area's ID expert, and try to help out as much as I can with anything when it comes to good ag practices. But the short answer is, if they're calling themselves a certified mushroom expert, I go, show me the certification. And it is what it is. So really the knowledge, I get very wary of anyone that throws a label like that on themselves, even myself. Is that point blank answer enough?
I would say anybody that's successfully and like clockwork cultivating these species are what I would call amateur mycologists at the very least. To what Josh just said a moment ago, there are degree paths that one can pursue to become a mycologist. A lot of states have at least one, if not multiple, state mycologists. So, for example, Illinois has one that I know of. That's Dr. Andrew Miller with the Illinois Natural History Survey. So he is a state licensed, I believe, mycologist with the University of Illinois Natural History Survey. Other states have other programs. But yeah, like Josh mentioned throughout the presentation, I would honestly argue that anybody that can consistently produce mushrooms is understanding fungal life cycles and is adequately controlling the process sufficient to replicate their results, which is amateur science in the field of mycology.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
won't say every grower would be a mycologist, but every mycologist could be a grower. That's definitely true. Also, and the term was used in the previous FDA code, now it's gone. This is a good example of regulatory bodies assuming there would be something like that, and that's why they took it back out. It wasn't, for all intent and purposes, it's a mistake because there was no certification process. And making assumptions based on how other ag practices go, sometimes you run into that. Government agencies responsible for regulating mushroom farms. USDA is the biggest one. FDA also has some oversight. There's not a ton of regulations over mushroom farming in general. Again, sometimes it's because it doesn't need it. But that's also why I like to engage with folks like Nick here and you guys, because it doesn't mean there aren't health hazards to watch for or environmental hazards to watch for, especially on a huge scale. But regulating bodies, it's going to come out of those two. Pharmacists in France still mushroom experts. I don't know, but that's cool. That. Again, I'm not going to get into historical stuff in France. France and Italy have, and in Europe in general, are huge, what we call microphilic. They're mushrooms are a daily part of the diets out there. And pharmacists in France used to be very knowledgeable about mushrooms due to the medicinal compounds. A lot of our medicines. I mean, blanked on the main one.
Penicillin.
Penicillium. Yeah, penicillin comes from penicillium, which is a mold. Again, if you're a fungus expert, most of a good portion of our best medicines come out of the fungal world, and it just is what it is. They're unique little buggers.
Yeah, I see this Morel question, and yeah, answer that one, and then I think I got to jump in for sake of time, but that's a great question.
The short one on the cultivating morels was hit and miss. We understand their life cycles a lot more. I mean, that was why it was my main focus for 30 freaking years, was understanding their life cycles. And there's several species of morel. If you didn't know, like, we used to assume there was 2 species here, the yellows and grays, traditionally known. We used to think there were 2 separate species, and we even named them the same species you'd find in Europe. And it was recently, I'm going to say in the last 2 decades, it wasn't longer than 20 years ago, we finally gene typed them and went, yeah, they're the same species. It happens. So they renamed them Americanus, so Mortella Americanus, which go America. Is it gotten better, easier? Yes. Because we understand life cycles enough, we understand these different species life cycles enough. That being said, is it easy? No. Extremely difficult. Even those of us that is the closest to experts you'll ever find on it, you'll still see us on our knees out there on those beds begging them to grow, because they do what they want. That's what I always say.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, if you have any other questions, please write them down. Hold them to the end. We're going to try and preserve the last 10 minutes for questions. But I got to jump into my stuff. Thanks, Josh. And I am going to turn my camera off so I can focus on transitioning between a couple of different screens. So let's do that. And then I'll go ahead and share my screen. And first, I'm going to walk folks through our Illinois Extension Mushrooms website. So can everybody see my crazy screen now with disregard my 12 tabs on the top? Can someone chime in and tell me if you can see the screen?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about all the tabs open. I'm a chronic tab opener. Yeah, this is our Illinois Extension Mushroom website. This launched in November of last year. I'm really personally really proud of this achievement. This was the culmination of a couple of different stumper grower questions that came into me, and then Josh, and then a fellow cultivator friend of ours. And then eventually we snowballed this into a couple of focus groups in 2022. We identified a big problem in the industry being that the answers to a lot of common frequently asked questions with regard to specialty mushroom cultivation are available. The answers are available online and in the literature and in legal resources and elsewhere, but they're kind of scattered and not in any one easy to read, easy to digest place. And so this is kind of our remedy for that problem. It's a clearinghouse of what we have so far accumulated in the specialty, also known as gourmet mushroom space. We use a couple of different names to signify the same thing. Also, specialty encompasses a couple of other mushrooms that are purported to have some health benefits as well, like Josh kind of started to touch on. So things like reishi mushroom, for example. But for the sake of time, and because I really want to go into improvements to the website, I'm not going to dive into the entirety of this thing and all the different little sections. I really encourage everybody that's on here today to spend some time on here after my talk today and digest it a little bit more. But for the time being, I'm just going to go back up to the top and kind of go one by one through these little tabs and tell you like what might be found in each one, and then maybe show off a couple, and then we'll go into updates. So here's our homepage. It speaks for itself. Cultivation. We have a tab on the different styles of farming. If anybody wants a refresher on those after Josh's presentation, they can find them here. We have a tab on varieties. This needs a little bit more visual work on my end. Here you'll find, I'll just go to it here now. Here you'll find a couple of visual examples of specialty versus common mushrooms. So this is the baby bella, which is within the agaricus mushroom family, the common button mushroom, and versus a mature bucket grown oyster mushroom. And then there's a couple of others listed on here that we need pictures for: blue oyster, pink oyster, golden, shiitake, lion's mane, chestnut, king oyster, hen of the woods, and more. Keeping in mind these are common names for honestly what should be Latin binomials, because that helps ID better. Moving right along for the sake of time. These are all the regulations that we could find with regard to the Illinois Department of Public Health and other regulating entities that would frequently intervene with respect to mushroom growers, and especially at points of sale in our state. I'm sure that I may have missed one or two, but I'll be honest, we tried our darndest to get all these in here. So with respect to cottage food operations, how these are defined as raw agricultural commodities, what that means in terms of Food Safety Modernization Act standards, food safety and retail food establishment codes are here too. Retail and wholesale regulations and regulatory authorities are listed by location of point of sale. So this is a question I get all the time. What licenses are required for me to sell mushrooms out of my home, right? Or on the farm, because the farm is typically on people's property. And so all those questions are kind of answered here. And then relevant questions and answers with respect to this subtopic. I'm sorry, I'm skipping right through it. There probably are some of you that were here in November, and I did want to give everybody a little bit of an overview of the site. So please go back and spend some time on here. We have the MGAP program that Josh mentioned, the Mushroom Good Agricultural Practices, that is mostly relevant to bed farming, although I would argue there are some sanitary practices covered in that training that are good to follow for specialty and culinary gourmet mushrooms. I'll navigate to this one. Because this was one of the most important kind of inspiration points for this entire work. Biggest question we got was, what is legally or safely allowed to be sold at farmers markets? The short answer is it's up to the market, but there are some products now that are widely understood to be safe and able to be sold, and so those things are let's see here. those things are listed here. We did include some items on, wild type mushrooms picked in the wild shall not be offered for sale or distribution. Wild being sold from a non-wild type source is covered here too. Okay. And then general Q&A for these sections. Preparation has its own tab. This is from our nutrition and wellness team. So we have internal cook temperature recommendations, and then also relevant portions of the Mushroom Good Agricultural Practice Guide. We also have a short statement on washing. Training and events, I will cover this in a little bit more detail in the website updates momentarily. You'll note there's 3 different programs here that aren't from our state that are just of interest to me personally and to lots of people in this space with respect to wild harvested mushroom programs in other states. Spoiler alert, that is the topic of my secret subtopic at the end of our talk today. But on this page, you can also find our recent webinars that we've done on these topics. This is an almost hour-long conversation on shiitake cultivation. We've got Michael Hatfield of Flyway Family Farms, one of the largest mushroom farms in Illinois, in Makanda, that's Southern Illinois, talking to us in 2022, giving a similar talk to what Josh kind of skimmed over, but in a little bit more detail here. And we also have relevant mushroom publications and events. So yeah, this is a kind of in progress resource, as you could see. Oh yeah, one final thing. Any blogs published by Illinois Extension that mention specialty mushrooms of any kind, morels here. This is a stock image of just mushrooms in general that we should have found a different picture for, but this one is on shiitake. I wrote this one. And so there are other ones written, haven't been one in a while, but this is where you can find them when they're written. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen momentarily and then switch screens over to my slides. All right. Okay, can everybody see my screen over here?
Yep.
Illinois Mushrooms website editions.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, really proud of the website, but we recognize that there's always work to be done, and that's no less true with the website in question. So I'm gonna fly through these slides. Sorry for kind of the bouncing around, but I'm really excited to show you all these. So I want to add, in some unknown amount of time, right? Because we all know change takes time and big organizations, 3 tabs to this website. The first one is already kind of here, but I really want to expand it. And that's the events and classes tab that I just showed. So I would really like some available presentations and contacts to be able to be listed on the site. We already had our mushroom experts listed. The 4 people that opted to be listed on that site were there at the bottom of our training and events page. So go back and check that out if that's of interest. But I'd like people to be able to go to this website and see who could give a talk on what, essentially. And so I think that would be a really handy tool for schools, nonprofits, health departments, honestly, other extension units, and other groups. I'd also like us to begin to organize regional or annual forays. Foray is a fancy name in the mycology world for a mushroom walk. Generally for the purposes of ID, by the way, although there are now some mushroom forays throughout the state that are for collection for consumption. The one that I know of being the Paramarquette Mushroom Festival, which is coming up actually at the end of April here. And those would be in spring or fall, led by mushroom experts throughout the state. This would really require a lot of work and collaboration between many different partners. So this is kind of a wish list, if you might say. But I do think there is quite a lot of call for programs like these. And then same thing with planned classes and workshops by region. Extension and other nonprofits offer many different classes on many different topics, some of them being on the topics of mushrooms. So it would be cool to see a heat map of previous classes given, so that again, when you're looking at a list of classes that could be offered by different contacts, you might be able to see where those could be offered, and that would help you kind of fine tune your request as a presentation requester. And then finally, an event and class suggestion tool. So kind of like a Q&A submission tool, but a little different. if there was a desire to be a collaborator on a joint extension partnership for a class, or to be able to, yeah, frankly, tell us what classes we should put on, that would be helpful. All right, so that's number one. Number two, obviously, a frequently asked questions tab needs to be developed. We had one in the original model for the website, and we eventually abandoned ship on that, opting instead to list frequently asked questions below the appropriate tab that was already in existence on the website. So basically, anything to do with varieties would have been posted under the varieties tab. Permits required would be under regulations, etc. But these top two especially are what I get the most questions about. We really need to come up with some canned responses. My mushroom expert hesitate to even say that, but yeah, the extension mushroom contact team and I really need to come up with some good canned responses. And this is honestly like business advice that we're not technically allowed to give. There are some excellent webinars that exist on that from other organizations and partners. But this one at the bottom being a really cool idea, we really need a submit your question tool that automatically pings one of us so that people don't have to track you down and get up the gumption to reach out to somebody individually by email, because I know that's uncomfortable or just a lot of work for somebody to have to do to go about getting a question answered on something in some cases so simple. All right, so this is the third and final update that eventually, note these three words up here, potentially, maybe, someday. I'm really hoping sooner rather than later. But I really would like to add a tab that would speak to an Illinois wild mushroom training and certification tab. So before I dive into this content, currently the case right now is that Illinois extension educators are not allowed to educate the public with respect to the edibility of wild mushrooms. So this is not me, saying go out and eat whatever mushrooms you find out in the woods. So with that disclaimer out of the way, what I'm gonna try and break down for you all today is a little bit of a case study of what some of our nearby states, extension entities, Department of Public Health entities are doing. And eventually, I'd like us to have a wild mushroom ID training and certification program for the harvest and sale of wild edible mushroom species in Illinois, recognizing currently that wild edible mushrooms are not eligible for sale at any Illinois farmers market. So recognizing that laws would have to change. But I propose that this training be modeled exclusively on trainings by surrounding state extension, Department of Natural Resource, Department of Public Health contacts, and mycology nonprofits that have successfully launched programs like these across the country and that have been in existence for in some places more than a decade, especially out east and northeast United States. Partners would include the Illinois Mycological Association, Illinois Natural History Survey, multi-state nonprofit mushroom education groups like Mushroom Mountain and others, and recognizing, of course, the implementation of this part of our website could only come about after extension program leader buy-in, development of curriculum or borrowing and modification of curriculum from other states, program piloting, changing our laws, staff training, and field testing. So yeah, it could be a while, but this felt like an adequate place to propose this and then have people chime in and give us your advice for how best maybe we could go about this.
Hey, Nick, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, no problem.
To speak to that, a good example would be Iowa right next door. They have a certification class and a that they give for harvesting and selling wild mushrooms, and they do about what 8 species is what we talked about this morning.
Yeah, you're previewing my presentation slide. It's the next one.
Is it okay? Never mind. I'll shush and let you keep going. I'll speak with that point then.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So yeah, just all this to say, I'm about to kind of get into how our nearby state extension services and government organizations are definitely leading the way in this department, and they have been doing so for a long time. And frankly, it is time for Illinois to catch up. And I would love for us to be part of that conversation and part of that process. And so I'm going to very briefly go over how 4 states nearby have been safely and effectively conducting their wild mushroom programs, and then pull out some common denominators and propose kind of a draft path that we might be able to pursue. So number one is Iowa State University. I'm going to hit you with a lot of info. You're not expected to absorb all the stuff that's on all these pages. Please. Oh, I heard that this presentation is being recorded, and I'm told it's going to live on the YouTube page. I think Illinois Environmental Health Association YouTube page. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but please go back and watch this video and like hit pause on these slides if you need more time to visually digest. So I'm sorry for the lack of time that I have to really dive into the weeds here, but I want everybody to specifically pay attention to these red boxes on the slides. Those are kind of the things I want to focus on. So this is now an annual springtime event, and it's put on by Iowa State University Extension, and they offer classes for anybody interested in being able to sell wild harvested mushrooms within the boundary of Iowa. And they're training people to harvest, first identify, then harvest, safely store, and sell 8 different wild harvested mushroom species in Iowa. And they have to complete a certification workshop that covers not only obviously the target species, but of course the distinguishing from poisonous lookalikes. And so they have visual, well, when they had photos, they had visual examples, but it's 8 different types of mushrooms, but you also notice that there's multiple species next to each type. So for morel, we have about 4 different species here. For oyster, we have 4 different species. So these are all, these are all Morchella. They're all types of morels. These are all Pleurotus. These are all types of oysters. So like Josh mentioned, we're kind of nerdy about this stuff, but anyway, they cover morel, oyster, chicken of the woods, hen of the woods. I wish there was a picture of that one because it's cool to look at. They also have all the IDing resources here. They have chanterelle, which most people in this space probably have heard of. Bear's head tooth, otherwise known as the much more common name that I've heard is lion's mane. That's why we prefer Latin binomials, because when you say Hericium americanum or Hericium erinaceus, we know what you're talking about. I've heard this called hedgehog as well. I think that's a Southern Illinois thing or an Iowa thing. I've never heard that in my life until
but hedgehogs can also mean a completely different mushroom that's similar to a chanterelle, just to get nerdy again. So again, binomial names are always better.
Right. So, yeah, for the sake of time, I'm going to go on. They have 2 others here. They also have, a disclaimer about, yeah, people can be poisoned by eating misidentified mushrooms. And so by the end of this workshop, they make sure that those trained to do this are definitely not going to make those mistakes. All right, and then they also have Department of Inspections and Appeals rulings relevant to mushrooms. They have a consumer advisory that has to be posted anywhere where they're sold and have to be acknowledged by buyers. They even have an honorable harvest foraging ethic guide. And last but not least for Iowa, they also have a calendar specific to Iowa and Midwestern states for mushroom emergence, which really helps cut down on potential lookalike mistakes, which I really liked. So moving right along here, now we're to the Hoosier Mushroom Society. This is Indiana's wild ID harvest and training program. This is 8 years old. So you'll note in the previous slide, we're 6 years old in Iowa, 8 years old in Indiana. So they've been doing this for 14 plus years cumulatively. 2024 classes just happened, I think. Yep, in January. And this is what I want people to see here. They have 2 different classes, which I think should be mimicked. They have a standalone class for, I'll go back to this in a second. Oh, okay, that's the next one. I'll show you. They have a standalone class for morels and food safety because there are so many different types of morels depending on your state. And there's so many ways to misidentify those. There's some false morels that people frequently every year misidentify and eat. Some argue that you can eat those. Nobody that's doing these classes is arguing to eat the Gyromitra or false morel species. And then they have a standalone wild mushrooms class, which covers the rest of them that we've kind of touched on. So like lion's mane, chicken of the woods, and those. You will not be issued a letter of reference from this class or a refund if you don't pass their exam. Really liked that. There are additional attempts allowed. You do have to pass with, I think it's an 80 or a 90% to pass the class. And then this is the best part of this particular state program. You need 2 letters of reference now. So I like how they publish what they're changing about their program every year. You need 2 letters of reference to be able to sell in the state of Indiana. One of them has to be a mycologist. Another can be a person who's been certified as a wild mushroom identification expert before. And also, this is all in tandem with the Indiana State Department of Health. So I'm going to pull out those commonalities between these programs in a little bit, but that's one of them, is that everybody's working with their departments of public health to put these together. Here's a list of the species that are covered and their lookalikes, dates and times. We don't need to go into this. Why should I get certified? Many buyers do not have the ability to properly assess whether the mushrooms that somebody brings them, if you're a restaurant owner, for example, were correctly identified. So the certification program has allowed them to build a trusted marketplace for wild mushrooms in Indiana, right? And so becoming certified will allow you to legally sell wild mushrooms within the state of Indiana, et cetera, et cetera. And so finally, the Indiana State Department of Health and county health departments will honor this certification as a basis for fulfilling the requirement of mushrooms needing to be certified by a mushroom identification expert. So to that question earlier, in Indiana, you actually become a mushroom ID expert by taking this class. So that's a little bit different than other trainings. I'm going to move on because I really wanted to leave more than 10 minutes for questions, but oh well. All right, moving on to our third program, we have the Missouri Mycological Society. They actually just started, I believe, this past year with the system that Indiana has put in place. So 2 different programs, a morel certification program, and then a wild mushroom certification program. I really like that, and I think if Illinois is to do a program, we should probably give morels the respect and attention that they deserve, especially considering that that's the species that most people are stoked about and comfortable with. And then here's the list of species covered. You'll notice some commonalities here between this program and other programs. These are covered in the wild mushroom certification class. And then again, please be aware, this is interesting, and this has some implications for Illinois. Please be aware that selling mushrooms harvested from public land in Missouri is illegal. It is therefore the forager's responsibility to find safe, legal, and private locations from which to harvest. So currently, Illinois residents are allowed to harvest and consume wild foraged mushrooms from state of Illinois land, as long as that land is not designated as a Illinois nature preserve or an Illinois preserve. So those preserves typically have rare fauna and flora that are not widely distributed, so you can't go there. So if an Illinois program were to come into being, it would be interesting to see if that regulation allowing people to forage on public land would have to change to start protecting our natural resources. So there may be some not unintended consequences, but some things that would have to change. And then last but not least, Wisconsin also has a program. So that's 4 of the 5 states that border Illinois have a program. Just want folks to see that. And then check this out. They, instead of having people come to one particular place, which the other 3 classes do, this program, which was put on by the, Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection in combination with the Wisconsin Mycological Society, they're putting on these classes in 4 different locations across the state, really opening up that access possibility to people that may not be able to travel that far. So this class actually combines all the species in one, which I don't really like. It's not, frankly, as long as I think is probably necessary to cover all that. But I just wanted to highlight these couple of factors here. They worked with Wisconsin DATCAP and the Mycological Society. I'm sure members of the public that are amateur mycologists were also involved. And then here's what the class covers. Key identification practices for species for sale to grocery stores and restaurants in Wisconsin. I really like that they included correct handling and storage of wild harvested fungi, etc. You'll also notice that this list of species is quite a bit longer. So I'm not gonna pretend to know the content in Wisconsin, but I would be doing a 2-day training if it were me at the very least for this amount of species. And I think, so this is 2024, this is most current. I believe this was the first year that they did this. So I'm sure that just like everybody else, they'll try one thing and then it'll be time to, move on and amend their program. So I guess we'll see how they do up north in the years to come. But there are many admirable things that we could borrow from this program as well. So before I go into the commonalities, this is my pitch for why Illinois should create its own program. We have economic reasons to do so, being basically just tax revenue. A lot of people, especially I've heard in Iowa and Indiana, are coming across the border, harvesting mushrooms in Illinois areas, and then bringing them back across the border and selling them in their states. And so we're losing tax revenue. Probably not that much, but a non-zero amount. Food access is a big one. Mushrooms are highly nutritious. They're a renewable resource and they're widely available throughout the year. Again, this is not me like expressly advocating for people to go out and eat whatever they find in the woods. But for example, chanterelle or oyster or lion's mane are extremely nutritious. Education, cultivating an awareness of surrounding woodlands for youth and adults would have positive outcomes, could also help with conservation initiatives. And there's a culinary and agritourism benefit for the state, especially for restaurant owners and farmland owners. And so we're running out of time here. Here are some common themes that I found. Again, this program will be recorded, so please dive into this a little bit more at your discretion. But all these mushroom species that are taught by these 4 programs were the most common to be found across all 4 states, and poisonous lookalikes are always hit hard in their programs. All 4 state programs included 8 of the same species. So those are, maybe some to start with. 2 of the programs required documentation of sale and receipt of mushrooms by all parties and storage of those records for 90 days for traceability. All of the programs worked together between educators, state health departments, extension, and state legislatures. So this is a big collaborative process. This is not going to be achievable unless that is followed. And I think that it's exemplary that this was done in the other states as a collaborative process. 2 of the 4 programs had a standalone morel class, which I really thought would be necessary, which covers 6 morel species across 4 states, recognizing that there aren't that many in Illinois. These states offered a second other edible species class like we saw, which was great. And then 1 program required 2 letters of reference, which I think is commendable. One from a mycologist or equivalent. All of the programs required an in-person learning component for in-field and in-lab learning, which I think is definitely a good idea. They all had remote components, or 3 of the 4 of them had remote components, but those that did required 100% cameras and mics on attendance to advance to the exam, which, as we all know, in the day and age of post-COVID and Zoom is not always the case, like today. That's okay, though. We wouldn't have the bandwidth to do this otherwise. And then all states had certification exams that are extremely difficult to pass without proper training. Certifications are good for 3 years, etc. So we have 5 minutes left. I really want to hear a question or two. I'm not going to read all these out loud here, but this is just to say, this is my idea for how we may go about taking steps to work towards a Illinois wild mushroom ID training, certification, and harvest program. Again, I'm not going to read all these out loud, but we are thinking about this. I am thinking about this. We have a natural resource environment and energy educator team that could help. I need to loop them in. We have program leaders in extension that I would need to get permission from to go about this work. But for the sake of time, again, come back, check this slide out, email me with questions. And I want to open it up for 1 or 2 questions. And while those questions are taking place, please, please, please do me a huge favor, do Josh and I a huge favor. Take our survey here by using the QR code on your screen. Illinois Extension is federally, state, and locally funded. And the only way that we get a good portion of our funding is knowing who we're programming to and whether or not we're meeting parity for the purposes of civil rights compliance. So it means a lot When you take this survey, it should take you about 2 minutes to get through the questions. There are components in the survey that will allow you to leave anonymous responses and suggestions for how to do better next time. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, turn my camera back on, and hopefully we have a question or two.
And Nick, if you don't mind me jumping in again, Walter brought up something that I was thinking about while you were talking about the wild harvesting aspects. There are reasons for the certification instead of just leaving it wide open. And that's a story we hear so often. And a lot of it has to do with, especially with folks that are immigrants. They're coming over from the EU or from the Pacific Rim countries, that mushrooms are a daily part of their life. They trust, they know what they're doing. But then they come to the United States where we have such a wide, I mean, we're a big country, a lot of natural resources, but also a lot of variation in our fungus. And things that look like what they saw in, say, Poland or China, they look alike, but they can be deadly here. We see that a lot with smaller puffballs that typically in Asia they can eat. But here they can be mistaken for something like destroying angel, which its name should tell you is very deadly. That's the number one poisoning is from that little white, looks like a puffball. It's part of its growing cycle, looks identical to a puffball. And if you don't know what you're looking for, it can be deadly. But it can also go all the way. It's important that when we're doing these programs, good, responsible growers, we're not just growers. I mean, I spend as much time on the National Institute of Health's website going over research projects for what we're seeing with mushrooms and health. And a good example would be this last weekend at the farmer's market, I had somebody quizzing me on reishi for, they wanted to take it, but they weren't sure. And one of the things I found out was they were having kidney function issues, and I cautioned them. And I said, you probably want to avoid the reishi for the simple fact that studies have shown that it is, no, I'm sorry, I'm saying reishi, I mean chaga. Chaga mushrooms don't react well with kidney dysfunctions, depending on what disease you're looking at, but in general, just avoid it. But a lot of your supplements that are hitting the market, like, I don't want to name brands, but that you see in your ads all the time, or blends of all this stuff in there, somebody might be taking it because they want the medicinal compounds of a lion's mane. But if they're having liver or kidney issues and they may get the chaga, it may cause kidney stones, which no one wants. So it's important for not only growers, but also the state to be responsible for making sure these programs are put in place, because people are going to take this stuff one way or the other. But it's good to have good economic programs that are put in place that drive this industry. This industry is booming, huge. And I guarantee just about every one of you in this room, in your area of responsibility, have an up and coming mushroom farm. I guarantee it. I can buy a name for you if you need me to. But it's also good to know that we have responsible growers and also wild harvesters that know what they're doing. Because we need to know this kind of stuff as the mycology advances and we understand more about how it impacts human health, and for good and bad. And sorry, Nick, I'm trying not to take over your.
Oh, you're good. It is 3 o'clock though, and my ex-colleague Lori George is next at 3 o'clock. So I want to give the floor back over to Lori. But thanks everybody for the invitation for both of us to speak to you today. I'm sharing my screen one last time. Hope you can all see it. But the QR code is there. More importantly, contact info, email address is listed there below. And go back through the webinar, digest as you will. Josh's email was in the previous slides. And I'm sure Justin and Arne can get you our contact information should you need it. Thanks a lot for your time, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Nick and Josh. Great presentation. Yes, with that being said, I guess we'll just dive straight into our next presentation. Louis, are you available? Can you hear? There you are.
I am. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Guys. Yes, I'm ready to go. Let me go ahead and pick it up here real quick.
All right. So Lori will be talking to us today about, and I want to say, yep, I'm correct, FFMA with Agriculture for Regulators. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And this is a topic that is a little off, but it kind of goes in with the public health department and FDA. And so I think this is going to be an eye opener maybe for a few people that don't know what FSMA is. And let me just introduce myself first. Number one, I'm gonna stop my video because I live in a very rural area in Southern Illinois and my bandwidth is really low. So I'm gonna turn that off to begin with, okay? So a little bit of introduction, as Nick said, I used to work for the University of Illinois Extension and Small Farms Local Foods for approximately 10 years before I left. And joined the Produce Safety Alliance team. When I was working for the University of Illinois Extension for probably 8 out of my 10 years, I focused a lot on food safety and how we can grow safe food, community gardens, donation gardens, food banks, soup kitchens, individuals that want to just make sure that the food they're growing for the community is safe. So a lot of my background is with that. When I joined the Produce Safety Alliance back in 2021, I was specifically working with farmers and growers that had to fall under the FSMA or Food Safety Modernization Act and the Produce Safety Rule. So let's talk a little bit about what the Food Safety Modernization Act is. First off, it was signed into law on January 4th of 2011 by President Obama. And it's the most sweeping reform of the United States food safety laws in over 70 years. The main objective of FSMA is to focus on prevention of food safety issues. Now, with the Food Safety Modernization Act, they have 7 steps. The produce safety rule, which I teach nationally and internationally, is the main one that talks about the standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce for human consumption. The other steps that we have are the preventative controls for human foods and animal foods where processing does occur, foreign supplier verification programs for individuals and organizations that want to bring in food from other countries, accreditation of third-party auditors and certification bodies, and so FSMA has a lot to deal with that, sanitary transportation of human and animal food, as well as the prevention of intentional contamination and adulterization of food before it comes into commerce. So FSMA is actually focused on the prevention of food safety issues, and it does encompass the entire food system, as I'll talk more about. So FSMA, again, the produce safety rule is very specific. It's the first ever mandatory federal standard for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fresh produce. So some of the growers that you might encounter, whether they're selling into retail or whether they sell at the farmer's market or on farm stands, they may be eligible for an exemption or exclusion from the produce safety rule, meaning they don't have to follow the rules and regulations of FSMA, produce safety rule. And it's going to be based on several things. The first one is what type of commodities are grown. FDA, when they wrote the produce safety rule, they said that there are 34 specific commodities that are really consumed raw, and they have definitions on how they decided really consumed raw are. So those growers are eligible if they grow commodities that are really consumed raw, and some of these may be things like sweet corn, pumpkin, horseradish, all these types of commodities, potatoes that people generally don't eat raw. The second one is can be eligible if they are growing these products and then selling them to a processing facility where it's going to include a kill step, meaning there's going to be some sort of heat treatment associated with that product itself. The third one is going to be on the average annual produce sales, as well as the annual average food sales and sales to qualified end users. Now, this can be variable depending on how big the farm is and how much the farm sells, right? So I could talk about that in a little bit later concerning a little bit more definition into those, but those are some of the eligibilities on that. When I train growers and I train producers under the produce safety rule, I try and get all growers to understand that they are the ones that need to take the action to reduce the food risks on their farm. They are the ones who know their farm policies and procedures, how they grow the produce, and each type of produce that they grow is going to be different. So basically with the FSMA produce safety rule, what I try and tell the growers is just keep the poop off the produce. That's what we're specifically looking for on this. During my trainings, I talk to them about the outbreaks that are associated with produce. Now, I know that this only goes until 2014, but from 2014 to 2024, I'm sure that you are familiar with all the types of recalls that we've had, such as romaine lettuce and other commodities in the marketplace. So a lot of these percentages may go up, but generally what I get them to understand is that those leafy greens and the melons and tomatoes and fresh fruits and berries, the things that are eaten specifically raw are the ones that have the highest type of outbreaks linked to that produce contamination. And it's going to include things like the herbs, the cucumbers, grapes, green onions, and other things that we traditionally grow here in the United States and get into the commerce itself, into retail. Some of the challenges, because they know that these are some of the high contamination areas, but they're not really sure why. So what I try and do is I delve into some of these produce safety challenges. Number one, it's not cooked. So we talked about that already. Contamination is sporadic. You can't tell that there's going to be contamination on the produce when you look at it. It only happens after the person eats the produce. Okay, so it's really difficult to remove on the produce once it's present. So those three pictures at the bottom, the strawberry, the melon, and the lettuce leaf, these all have some sort of natural openings or have some sort of rough surfaces or folds or netting where that contamination can stay in the produce itself. So like the melon in the middle, you're going to have water within those crevices, but because the water tension is so tight, that water may not be removed that has the contamination in there. So as it dries on the melon surface and someone cuts into it, then there's a potential for that contamination to get into the fruit as they cut that fruit open. Also, the contamination can occur through natural openings, stem scars, bruises, and cuts as they harvest the produce and they start taking care of it in the packing house, whether they're washing it or actually field packing it itself. And we talk about bacteria that can grow and other types of contaminations on that. So what I try and get them to do is to understand the differences between those. So with my produce safety rule training topics, a lot of them are what you probably teach as well, or because the IEHA needs to present this information to the growers so they know that they're doing everything right to reduce the contamination, whether they're selling at a farmer's market or a retail store. But some of the topics that I teach are the introduction to microbial contaminants. We talk about worker health, hygiene, and training, and that the workers are probably the front row individuals to help reduce that contamination. A lot of the contamination that you see on fresh produce can be from the fecal oil route, meaning someone goes to the bathroom, they don't wash their hands, and they go back to handling that fruit. I also teach information about soil amendments and wildlife and domesticated animals and land use, and how these animals can contribute to that, as well as any type of amendments that they have. Agricultural water is probably one of the most important things that I talk about, whether it's production water or post-harvest water. I talk about post-harvest handling and sanitation, as well as developing a food safety plan. Now let me go into these a little bit more so you get a better idea of what the produce safety rule encompasses. So with the microorganisms that we are talking about, we're not talking about physical contaminations, we're not talking about chemical, just microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and parasites. This is probably one of the hardest things for growers to understand. They're not scientists. So trying to get them to understand that these microorganisms can be found on the farm and what they do and how they harvest, whether they're using raw manures or whether they're using compost. These are the things that we try and get them to understand. So Salmonella and E. coli are probably the two, as well as Listeria. Listeria is going to be important, especially if someone is using a cooler and has standing water in the cooler itself. Listeria still has the potential of growing and remaining in the cooler environment. Viruses, norovirus and hepatitis A, this is going to reach out to the talk that I give on worker health and hygienes and making sure that their workers are treated or they are understand that if they're sick, they don't come into work. And the parasites such as the Giardia and the Cryptosporidium are going to be, the water-based. Most of them are going to be water-based. And that's why when I start talking about water regulations as far as production water and post-harvest water, those are the most important modules that I try and focus on. The second module, training the employees. The biggest concern that we have with some of these large commercial, if they use H1A training, H2A training people coming in from Mexico or other countries, some of the individuals that are hired may not know that throwing that toilet paper in the toilet is going to be important rather than throwing it into the garbage. So getting the employees to understand and getting them trained and document that training. So when an inspector comes on the farm, it shows that you've done your due diligence is what I'm trying to do. Individuals or farms that have livestock, I talk to them about making sure that their clothing and their footwear is changed before going into the production of post-harvest areas, because the contamination can come from the clothing and the boots themselves if they're not careful. Washing the employees' hands, making sure when they wash, how often they wash. Tools and equipment is another important factor that I try and stress when I teach, because a lot of the biofilms, a lot of the contamination can stay on those cutting tools and equipment. And if it's not cleaned and sanitized properly, it's going to be important to be able to do that, as well as any type of injury or illness that the employees have, that the growers need to know what to do in those cases. As far as the soil amendments, a lot of the growers, not a lot, but most of the growers that I talk with are from the plain communities, the Amish communities, where they do use working animals in their fields. So we talk about soil amendments. What type of amendments do you use? Many growers use raw manures or composted manures. Then I talk to them, well, if you use raw manure, how soon do you put it onto your crops? Does it have the potential of contacting the harvested portion of the crop? Then we talk about crops receive soil amendments. Are they fresh crops or they're agronomic crops? So if they're fresh produce crops, then there are specific rules and regulations that you need to follow under the produce safety rule to make sure that that poop doesn't hit that produce. If it's going on to agronomic crops, generally those agronomic crops are going to have some sort of processing associated with it. When do they apply those soil amendments? It depends on, if they apply it directly before harvest or that they wait a certain amount of time. So if they're using raw manure and they apply it like 2 days before harvest, that's going to be a red flag that they need to be aware of. What I try and do is to get to understand that if they do use raw manure, you need to increase the days of harvest from the time of application to the time that you harvest. Because the longer time they have the soil amendment on that's incorporated in the soil, it's on the soil, that increased amount of time will help reduce those microorganisms in the soil and hopefully reduce a little bit of that contamination that can occur on that fresh produce. How is it applied? Incorporated, injected, or surface applied? We try and get the growers to understand that incorporating that manure or soil amendments is going to be a lot better because it can break down faster. You have less contamination of the environment if it's incorporated rather than surface applied. And then how much and how often to apply them. So each state is going to be different depending on how much manure or how much compost that you can apply over a specific time frame. And so those are things that growers need to be aware of. Talking about the wild animals, we talked to them that they can carry human pathogens such as E. coli, salmonella, chickens if you work with chickens, listeria, if you have standing water in the packing house or in the cooler. How these can spread through the feces in the fields and fecal contamination as the animals move throughout the fields from one farm to another. Maybe the use of the water, if they're using surface water, such as a lake, to irrigate their crops, that can also be a problem that I try and get them to understand. And then we know that the wild animals can be very difficult to control, right? So we try and get them to think about different ways and different techniques to be able to control these animals on the farm. Production water. This is probably, as I mentioned before, one of the hardest things for growers to understand. At this time, the produce safety rule says that you need to test your water to make sure that you have a low amount of E. coli in it. Now, with the production water, you're talking about irrigation, fertigation, any type of foliar sprays that you can use maybe for pesticides, or any type of frost protection that you're going to be using that water for. And so right now, under the produce safety rule, growers can use water that does have a certain amount of E. coli in it, but they have to test it and they have to make sure that the amount of time that they apply the water to the amount of time of harvest is going to be increased, as I mentioned before. The other type of water that I talk about is post-harvest water, right? Water used during and after harvest. These are things like rinsing and cooling, fungicide and wax applications on the fresh produce, hand washing, cleaning and sanitizing, and ice making. And when I talk to some of the growers that use ice, they don't realize that, they need to clean that ice machine out, right? So when I talk to some of the growers and I say, how often have you cleaned the ice machines? Like, oh, I'm supposed to do that, right? So getting them to understand is going to be important. Post-harvest handling and sanitation is another module that I teach. We talk about implementing worker training, how to develop a standard operating procedure, setting up pest control programs, how to clean and sanitize food contact surfaces, and why it's important to reduce that buildup of biofilms and any type of contaminants that can occur. Using equipment that can be easily cleaned and sanitized. Some of the equipment when I go on farms have wooden equipment. Now that doesn't mean that wooden equipment can't be used. It still can under the produce safety rule, but there are certain things that they need to follow before they can, as they continue to use that wooden equipment. Cleaning and maintaining coolers and transportation vehicles. There are many farms that I go on where they have one vehicle, such as the pickup truck that they haul the compost in. Maybe they haul the chickens from one place to another, and then they put their produce on to take it to the market on Saturday morning to sell. And so we talk to them that it's going to be important to make sure that you maintain and clean those vehicles. And the last one is developing a food safety and traceability plan. Now, a food safety plan is not really required under the produce safety rule. However, when we start talking about the food safety and traceability plan, it's that traceability plan that's going to be important because there's a new rule that has been formulated and has been finalized, and it's going to be coming into effect in 2026, January, on traceability. So a lot of the growers that I talk with need to become familiar with the traceability plan. But basically what we're trying to get them to do is to become organized and focused on food safety. What do they grow? How do they grow it? What are the steps that their workers need to follow should something happen? What corrective actions do you have? Okay. And we try to get them to start thinking about the most important risk reduction steps on their farm. Now, the food safety plan is not necessarily required by the produce safety rule. However, if they do have buyers, like retail buyers or restaurants, some of the buyers will require them to have this food safety plan. Some third-party audits, a lot of the big commercial growers have to go through audits, Primus audits, USDA audits, where they have to follow rules and regulations, and the food safety regulations themselves. So there's a lot of reasons for the growers to do that, especially if they want to diverse or grow their operations. As I mentioned before, there are exemptions and exclusions. Some growers may be excluded on the commodities grown, such as those that are really consumed raw. Average annual produce sales. And I think that the majority of the farmers that you're going to see at the farmers markets are the ones that are going to be excluded. They don't make this average annual produce sales of less than $30,509 over a 3-year period. So those that make the less than that are excluded under the produce safety rule. They do not need to follow any of the rules and regulations, or if they're growing the food for personal or on-farm consumptions. Some growers may be exempt or qualified exempt based on the processing activity. So if they sell their produce to have a kill step, then they may be exempt from the produce safety rule because the produce is not going into commerce. It's going to a processor for heat reduction for those microorganisms. And the average annual food sales and to qualified end users for those that make less than 610,000. Now, qualified end users are a little bit different. You know, they can be exempt from the produce safety rule if 51% of their sales go to a qualified end user, such as a retail store or to a restaurant. So there are exemptions and exclusions in the produce safety rule. So how does it apply to farmers markets? Well, I believe the environmental health role with farmers markets is to provide guidance and education on food safety, which is a lot what I try and do with the produce safety rule. And you also try and prevent foodborne illnesses and outbreaks by talking to them, training them, or developing fact sheets on sick workers, needing to have a temporary hand washing station at booths specifically for those food vendors that sell at farmers markets, proper washing, rinsing, and sanitizing, holding temperatures, access to restrooms with hand washing, and proper storage. So what you do as far as your training of your farmers is a lot of what I do. I work with the sick workers, how to clean and sanitize their equipment, their tables that they use at the farmers markets, at making sure that they have access to restrooms with hand washing and proper storage, making sure that the product is off the ground. So you don't have a pet that's going to come by and pee on it, right? So these are some of the things that I try and get them to come to understand, which is a lot of what you also do as the environmental health representative. Now, I do teach at the Illinois Farmers Market Manager Certification Program, and I do teach food safety. And one of the things is I talk to the market managers and I say, you know, food safety, there is food safety in Illinois. There's the Department of Health, the local health departments, and I generally stress to them that they will be your best friends as you start working in as a farmers market manager, making sure that you understand what the rules and regulations are for that local department. There's the Illinois Cottage Food Act, which you're familiar with, I know you are, as well as market rules and regulations. So the market managers can create their rules and regulations. Now, some of the growers, some of the market managers that I have dealt with, they do farm inspections. They'll go out and they'll make sure that the products that they say they're going to sell at the farmer's market are actually being grown on the farm. So they don't have resale potential with that. They also, part of the market rules and regulations is good handling practices, whether they allow pets or not, whether they require hand washing stations for the vendors, are keeping food products and surfaces off the ground, making sure that you don't have any type of contamination with that. And I always try and encourage the farm market managers to encourage the vendors and producers to be properly trained. As I said, most of them are going to be exempt from the FSMA produce safety rules, but it's going to be important for the market to say, you know, my growers have been trained in food safety. And that's going to be an important, a good public relations type of information that can be sent out to the general public as well. So one of the questions I get when I start training growers and I start talking to them, they say, well, why should a market manager be concerned with outbreaks? Well, a lot of the growers come to me and say, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never made anybody sick, right? So why do I have to deal with this now? Well, because there have been instances of food-based illnesses that are not unique to large commercial growers. And there are probably the 5 of the things that I have here. So in 2000, there was cantaloupe in Colorado, if anybody remembers any of that. In Alaska, there were bagged peas that were sold at a farmer's market in 2008 that made people sick. Guacamole and salsa, which are prepared products in Iowa in 2010. Strawberries in Oregon in 2011. And this one was traced back to having deer or wild animals in the field. And I think that's basically what really started people thinking about that connection with the animals in the field, the poop in the field, and the strawberries that are being grown, and how it connects to making people sick. And in 2017, fresh shelled peas at a farmer's market in Wisconsin. And the thing about this is that when we talk to them about this, all of these that are listed, the majority of the cases, or 176 of the cases, were E. coli 0157H7 and Campylobacter. So those are the types of illnesses that were associated with those. There were 18 hospitalizations and 2 deaths. So trying to get farmers market managers to understand, as well as growers, to say, you know, the liability is there. These are things you need to think about. But I also tell them that the majority of the food safety responsibility is going to fall on the grower. It's not the market manager's responsibility to say, did you do this? Did you do that? How do you grow your produce? How do you, you know, wash your produce? Those type things. It's the grower's responsibility to make sure that their production practices, their harvesting, post-production practices, and transportation to the market make sure that the product is safe to eat. These two are the 2 pictures that I love to show when I present. The first one on the left, you're going to see the individual picking up that peach and sniffing it to make sure that he likes the smell and it's nice and soft, it's ready to eat. A lot of times I go into farmers markets and I see these people pick up the produce, or they squish the tomatoes and they say, I really don't want that one. And they'll turn around and walk away, right? That's a form of contamination, right? You have something that's on somebody's hands. You don't know where those hands have been. And so when I talk to growers, that's one of the things I mention to them, as well as having pets at the market with the dog that you see there that's big enough to be able to sniff and lick the eggs, right? So these are things that not only the grower needs to be aware of, you know, maybe don't put your product in the front where it can be reached by animals. Make sure the product is up off the floor, off the ground. So if the pet does pee, he's not going to pee on the product, right? So these are things to be aware of. For those growers that talk to me about, well, how are you going to stop someone from picking up the produce? Well, you know, offer to give them a sample if you want to do that. Maybe keep the produce back away from the edge of the table. There are several things that we did during COVID that some growers are still working on, are still doing. So these are the things that I try and stress when I teach in the Farmers Food Safety Modernization Act produce rule. Now, there are trainings available that I offer to the farmers market managers if they are interested in wanting to get their growers to start taking any type of classes, or if you here in the audience are interested in learning a little bit more. There is a National Good Agricultural Practices program, which is based at Cornell University. This is an online 3-week course that is paced at your own, you go at your own pace, 6 discussions that need to be completed. After you've done that, you'll get a little certificate that says, yes, you've completed the National Good Agricultural Practices Program, which is suitable for framing if you want to do that. The Produce Safety Alliance grower training is the one that is connected with the FSMA produce safety rule. Now, FSMA, again, is a mandatory training for growers if they fall into the guidelines of growing over 30,000, as I mentioned before. So the Produce Safety Alliance grower training, there is a cost associated with it. It is a 1-day training, or if they want to do a 2-day training, it's going to be state-based. But I do this training throughout the United States. I've also done this internationally for those individuals that want to bring produce into the United States. But this gives them a good indication of what the produce safety rule is. They get a big notebook covering all the topics that I discussed earlier as far as the modules. After they get the training, then they get a certificate stating that they have met the federal guidelines for the training on this. And this is what inspectors are going to be looking for when they come onto the farms to do inspections. So how does all this apply to retail? Well, you know, the larger retail and wholesale companies require farmers to have food safety training and a food safety plan. So many times when I've gone into like the wholesaler in Mount Vernon, or I've gone to Walmart or Schnucks or Deerbergs or Jewel or whoever I've talked to, they generally say, yeah, I'm not going to buy any products from anybody unless they have gone through that produce safety training. And they may have require them to have an audit, a GAPS audit, in order to show that they're raising the produce efficiently and without with a minimization of contamination. And the biggest thing that I try and get across when I talk to the growers is that the buyer sets the rules for the farmers. So if you have someone that sells at a farmer's market that is really exempt, but the buyer requires them to have a food safety plan or requires them to take that training, then the farmer has to do that. They will not buy the product unless the farmer complies with that. So it's a buyer sets the rules, okay? I've also reached out to some of the smaller mom and pop stores and the restaurants, local restaurants. They may not require the training or a food safety plan. So if a small grower has maybe 5 or 6 pounds of potatoes, or if they have lettuce that they want to sell to the market, you know, the market or the restaurant may say, okay, that's fine, I'll buy it from you, that's not a problem, and just kind of skip through it. So there's a lot of leeway here when it comes to retail. But the biggest thing right now is that really no one in Illinois regulates fresh produce. Okay, so the Illinois Department of Public Health, they go into retail, they'll go into restaurants, but really no one regulates fresh produce. Now, FDA, when we talk about farm inspections under FSMA, or the Produce Safety Rule, in Illinois, FDA is the regulatory agency. FDA is the one that will come onto the farm and do farm readiness reviews. Now, what is that? That means that FDA will come to the farm if the farmer requests it to actually walk through the farm with the grower and point out 3 of the biggest concerns that they see that the farm should make changes on before they go for a full inspection or if they're going to go for a full audit. Okay, so this is free. This is FDA will do this without a charge. Generally, they want to do it when the farm is in full production so they can see how it's going to be done. And then what happens is that the FDA is also do the actual farm inspections. So they will call the farm a few days before or a week before, and they say, this is FDA, we want to come onto the farm, we want to do an inspection. and FSMA inspection to make sure the farm is following the produce safety rule. And they only will do this to the farms that are actually that fall under the produce safety rule. So those exempt farms, FDA is not really regulating them at this point. They may sometime in the future, but I think what they're trying to do now is to find the farms that fall under the produce safety rule so they can start regulating and inspecting them. So what do? Both for the on-farm readiness reviews and the actual farm inspections is that they're looking for the egregious conditions that they find at the farm. Like if they find produce that's contacting a source of contamination. So they'll walk through the farm. They will find out if the farm has livestock. Do they use the animals in the fields? What are their standard operating procedures if something happens? What corrective actions do they have? So FDA is going to be the ones that is going to be important for that. So the FDA contacts I listed here, if you are not familiar with the local inspectors for FDA, the FDA does inspect the produce on the farms, but once it leaves the farm and goes to the store or the farmer's market, it's going to go over to IDPH to regulate on that. But the local inspectors, can contact Christian Esch, who is the product safety expert at FDA, as well as Lilia, who is an FDA investigator through the North Central region. And when I talk about the North Central region, I am the Midwest Regional Extension Associate for Produce Safety Alliance. The North Central region consists of 12 states. So she is basically an investigator for those 12 states, as well as the 12 that I work with. Here is our Produce Safety Alliance website. If you want some additional information concerning the Produce Safety Alliance, any type of trainings, any type of resources that may help you as you go forward in your inspections, your IDPH inspections, maybe for farmers markets or anything. I'm also giving you my contact information here. Should you have any questions or concerns, specifically on the Food Safety Modernization Act or the Produce Safety Rule, feel free to contact me directly and I can work with you on that. Okay. And that's all I have. I know it's short, but it's short and sweet, packed full, a lot of information.
No, thank you so much, Lori. It's greatly appreciated. Did anyone have any questions? I know someone had put a comment in the chat. The 2000 cantaloupe outbreak resulted in the second most number of deaths from a foodborne outbreak. I did not know that. My goodness.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate being invited here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate you. And thank you for everyone who participated. As I mentioned for the previous days, all of our conference days are recorded and will be made available to you. I believe Justin had said about 1 to 2 weeks after we wrap up this week. But if there is nothing else, I will give you guys back your last 20 or so minutes of the day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you on Thursday. Bye.